All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is June 24th, 2020, and I'm back with another Wednesday edition of the live show. I would like to welcome you, and looks like we got a little bit of a pullback happening in the market right now, which is kind of interesting. The funny thing is, and I'm going to pull up the S&P chart here. Funny thing is that recently the market's been kind of chopping around sideways. I would say, what's that? 6 days, right? Including today, down a little bit today, but just a little kind of range happening here, right? And so back on, let's say a couple weeks ago, 6/11. So yeah, it was a couple of weeks ago. Took a little sort of winger right there, right? It's kind of a big down day, a little shakeout or whatever. And then we had a few days of some sort of extreme volatility here, and then popped back up and have been trading in this little range. And for whatever reason, it seems to me like the sentiment, people talking about the market and everything that you see and read makes it sound like basically the market's just ripping to new highs. And of course, the Nasdaq been hitting new highs, and the FANG stocks and the big tech stocks now have been doing great. A lot of big moves there, but the overall market's really just been kind of grinding up and down sideways for a while here, and it seems like the sentiment has gotten a little frothy. So check it out. I cleaned up my chart here recently, and I like to keep things simple, and then every now and then I just delete all the stuff off my chart and kind of start fresh. And so what I got here is overhead resistance line, and then I drew this trend line just up across the most recent lows here, right? That seems to keep it real nice and simple. And so basically what we got here is, we had this sort of parabolic run up, right? And then big shakeout, and then kind of bounced, sort of right in the middle of this range here from this high to this low. And so right now we're still sort of in the middle of that range. I can tell you this, in order for the market, or the S&P at least, you talk about the market, in order for the S&P, which is what I typically refer to as the market, to go up here and finally hit a new high, it's going to have to break over this trend line. That's about as simple as technical analysis gets. There's a pretty big backlash, or there has been, against using technical analysis, and people make jokes about it and that, but there's certain aspects of it can get a little outlandish, right? You've seen me draw Fibonacci's on the chart. Well, I don't I don't actually use them for anything other than certain times, like when we had the big sell off and we started to rebound. It was interesting to look at fib retracement levels, right? But as we saw in past shows here, the market did not really get turned back at any of them. Every now and then, I mean, if you draw fibs on a chart, and just kind of by the nature of it, you can always find little spots where the market maybe ran into some resistance or found some support, that type of thing. But I don't I don't honestly believe that you can trade off of them, to tell you the truth. But at least I've never really used them for a whole lot, other than there's all kinds of indicators that you can look at and kind of slice and dice and glean them and that type of thing. But in the end, the market's going to do what it's going to do, and yeah, there's plenty of indicators you can use for warning signs. I kind of like the RSI as far as seeing how if the market's overbought or oversold. But as we know, it can always get more overbought or more oversold. And I like the MACD. I like some moving averages. Trend lines are interesting though. Trend lines are always kind of the thing that I always liked about trend lines is that it's kind of like I said before, the market the S&P can't hit a new high without breaking above this trend line, and that's sort of like a law of nature. Right? So it is what it is. But anyway, um, 35% sell off roughly, and then bounce of similar magnitude. And so right now, just kind of trapped here. The market is obviously outperforming the real world economy, which is still kind of and so hey, this whole rebound maybe has gotten ahead of itself. We'll just have to see, but it'll be interesting to see which way this sort of triangle resolves. So here's the thing is that, just suppose it breaks down, right? Suppose it breaks down to a lower level. Well, then, there's all this support. There's that low down there with support, and here's a gap right here that could potentially fill, but tons of support zones all the way down. And so, I mean, it would really take sort of a negative reaction to break this thing down. But and at this point here, you could start drawing some fibs and Fibonacci's and looking for support levels. So maybe I'll do that if it actually starts to break down. But as of right now, we're kind of trapped in this little range here, and it's all about individual stocks and sectors, right? On a day-to-day basis, like some individual stocks make really decent move have been making big moves up, and certain stocks have not rebounded like this. I noticed this morning that the financials were pretty weak, and so I mean, if you look at the financials here, geez, these were the all-time highs. Here's something really interesting about the financials is look at this. This is a monthly chart, and I have it on log scale. I keep my monthly, but look at this, 2007, right? 2007, before the great financial crisis, the XLF hit an all-time high up here, and then look at that, it just tanked, right? And then battled its way back over the next decade, finally got back to those prior highs and just poked above it. Basically poked above it for just 1 month, back in February, and then pretty big sell-off there. And so that's just kind of interesting. So when I go to this chart here and I look at this horizontal line, what I see is just these little pokes above the all-time high, and then interestingly enough, so the financials bounced about halfway back, and they've been pretty weak since, right? The airlines, I don't know what this line is, but big sell-off, kind of bottomed out for a while and had a huge rally, and now they're kind of selling off a bit. Biotech has been extremely strong. Hopes for a vaccine. See XBI. Yeah, look at that. There's two biotech ETFs. This XBI, I think, might be a little bit more diverse, but basically both of those have been hitting highs. Energy. So here's what we're seeing is some of these sectors, right? Some of the sectors you had the big sell off and then kind of a big rebound, and they've been acting weak now for a couple of weeks here, a few weeks, and so obviously the technology's been sort of the big winner here, right? Technology, Spider here, hitting a new high, new all-time high, and so everybody gets all excited about that. The Qs, which are extremely heavily weighted in just a handful of stocks, I think like 5 or 6 stocks in the Nasdaq 100 make up probably 25-30% of it. So anyway, everything's sort of revolving around. Let's look at the Dow real quick. Everything's sort of revolving around a combination of how bad is the pandemic and the second wave of the pandemic and virus, and how bad is the economy and how much is it recovering, right? And so on days where the market goes up, it goes up on, hopes for a quick rebound and the economy is reopening and getting back to normal. And then on days it goes down, especially recently, everybody's worried about rising cases of COVID, and so it's kind of the market's just kind of trapped in a news cycle really, and on a day to day basis, and nobody knows how it's going to play out, right? When the market goes, you can point to all sorts of problems in the economy, and like the Fed came out and said that I mean the Fed basically keeps saying that it's going to take a long time for the economy to recover, and it's going to be tough going for a while. They've already said they're going to hold interest rates at zero, through next year, right? We're only halfway through this year, and they're talking about holding interest rates at zero through next year. And the administration's talking about what they're going to do. See, at the end of July. See, that's when common sense. I was about to say I think, but common sense sort of would dictate that at the end of July, when the uh, the $600 a week extra government stimulus money runs out. Now, of course, I have a feeling that the administration is going to try and do everything within their power to keep things going and try and keep this market up and looking good. Almost every day that the market's down, you get Kudlow or Mnuchin or Trump or some of the Fed speakers or whatever trying to talk things up. It's kind of funny, but anyway. So, we're coming into today with a boatload of open trades, which is interesting. And some of these things, I mean, some of the ones that have been open for a while, we'll have to look and see why Citrix is kind of, some of them, I mean, they went up a bunch and then maybe they pulled back, that type of thing. And we got a couple of new ones here, right? A couple of new ones that have triggered since last week. And we got a couple here that have just really, really made huge moves. QDEL up 26%. This Fold, both of those are medical biotech stocks. We got some other pretty decent winners. So what I thought I'd do today is start at the bottom here. Might as well start at the bottom and just take a look at these open trades and see what's happening. And, a little bit of a dip this morning, so maybe some of these things will finally get closed. We're at the point now where there's an awful lot of open trades. We haven't seen this in a while, but it's kind of a function of, like I said before, individual stocks are, you can find tons and tons of great chart patterns when it comes to individual stocks. So the market is the market, and the Russell doesn't look anything like the Nasdaq, and so it's hard to even generalize about the market at this point. So it becomes about individual stocks. So this is the one that has been open the longest, and the funny thing is that I never did draw the target on here, right? The target on this is 150. So let me move that up a little bit. A couple of weeks ago, I drew this basically this green line, and I put it right there, and I said, there's sort of big resistance that's formed on the chart, and so I'm just going to take that line right now, and I'm going to move it to where the actual target is. So this particular stock has not hit the target yet. I'll mark that right up here. Target $150. Whoops. Target 150 even, and came kind of close. Let's see the high there, 148.75. That high, 148.71. So, but you can see sort of it's interesting. The first day that this opened, it's a nice little dip, consolidation, and then boom, it formed that cup in one day, pulled back again. So you can sort of see the progression of the trailing stop here. The nice thing about this is that trailing stop is basically, moved up to just about break even, right? So that's always kind of nice. Amazingly enough, it was able to sort of was able to stay in through this first dip here, and then this particular day, I'm going to guess, in fact I'm pretty sure that this day and then the following day at the close, that's when the stop trailed up, and which made a whole lot of sense. You guys know, like, the system's completely automated on the back end, so it's looking at everything and doing the calculations, and seems to be pretty smart, because it's basically been trailing this stop up in sort of ideal locations. So I can see a little spot on here where, and I got a couple other ones that are marked very similar to this, where basically you can sort of draw an uptrend line across the lows, and you notice that the trailing stop is just sort of hanging, under the uptrend line. So it's just sort of interesting. It's kind of a coincidence, honestly, but it makes a lot of sense. So that uptrend line fits pretty good. So, this thing's kind of, sort of hanging around up here toward, if this is a big giant range, it's kind of towards the upper end of the range. So all it's going to take is another one of these, for this cycle up to start, and then it's a pretty good looking stock. So anyway, let's move on here. Moving up the list. Fate. Fate is one that, when I did the show, I believe it was this day. Yeah, it would have been Wednesday, 6/10. Commented on how Fate was sort of triggering in on an anomaly of a move, right? We had the pullback, you got that little pivot low, and then typically what would happen is that, you'd get some consolidation down here, and this trigger would move down, and in theory, ideally, this thing would have triggered in, closer to, like, 30, 31. It would have triggered in over here, based on, like, consolidation lower, but we had this one sort of outlier day that triggered it in prematurely, but it's been hanging in okay, right? It's basically, the price is around the entry right now, and so it seems to be hanging in there. This would have been like the entry area this particular day, and so it just had its ups and downs, but all in all, looking fairly decent. You can see on the chart, once this stock gets some mojo going to the upside, it can make a pretty big move fairly quickly. So the crazy thing about this must be a pretty volatile stock, because the target on this is way up here, 39.50. So that's almost it's a little bit unusual, but it is what it is. It is what it is. Some of these, generally speaking, I draw the targets on here, and you're like, oh yeah, it's right there. It looks like it's easily achievable on literally like 99% of them, for whatever reason. And I have a feeling it's due to the percentages here, right? So, and if you think about it, with the trigger price, like, right in this area, that target looks fairly reasonable, and that's based on, the ATR of this particular stock, which is significant. So anyway, there we are. Not looking so bad. Moving on, we have quite a few gold stocks. Well, I should say precious metal stocks on here, and quite frankly, gold and silver and precious metal stocks in general have been doing great lately. So here you go. It's a good example. This is a beauty too. I'll tell you why. Is because is because you've got like sort of this cup forming over here. It's already hit the target. I mean, it's sitting basically right at the target now. Um, but you had this big run up and sort of consolidation, and then a little bit of a dip and a pullback. And so here's another one. Here's what I was talking about a minute ago, where you kind of draw an uptrend line across those lows, across the lows of basically this is the pivot low. You can see how it's sort of sandwiched in this little X pattern here. Like it's there we go. The pivot low on a GOLD is right there, and it's like it's sort of sandwiched right in between where this X occurred. Where that was the change in trend is basically what happened. So you get a stock that is pulling back, and then there's a pretty steep trend line there, but you got a trend line break, and then a run up, and then the first pullback, a higher low. And so I just connected the two lows of this pattern here, and you come up with like sort of little X or whatever. And so far so good, right? So far so good. And bigger picture, if I sit back in my chair and kind of look at the bigger picture, it looks like it wants to, head back up towards these highs here. Now, it could theoretically pull back a little bit first, but notice how, and I would suspect that after the update tonight, that this stop will probably, I'd say that the stop will move past the trigger. So this will be past break even, basically. And it's pretty close right now. And so you can see it may, and this trend line is just me drawing stuff on the chart. And so theoretically, like the next trailing stop move could come up, inside here. Like it could come up, just under the past few days here. I don't know. A lot depends on the ATRs of the stock and that type of thing. So it's not just trailing it up under the trend line. This is just an example where it happens to have a nice upward sloping trend line drawn on the chart, and that trailing stop just hanging up under it. So what you'll see is that we got a few precious metal stocks going here. And as you recall, it might have been 2 weeks ago. This was the first one that actually triggered in, and we went over and looked at the stocks that were on the pending list, and I noticed that there was multiple, gold and silver mining stocks on there, and I said, well, you may just want to, rather than be sort of over focused on that particular sector, you may just want to go for one, this being it, because it was the first one. So that turned out pretty well. So anyways, next up on the list here is Netflix, right? Interestingly enough, I was kind of excited when Netflix triggered in, because obviously it's one of the FANG stocks, which we don't see that often. We don't really see, I mean, we see popular names come and go from the list frequently, but don't always see like the top 10 of stocks, and especially like the FANG stocks don't always have the type of behavior that the system looks for. But anyway, long story short, so there you go. Netflix triggered in over here. Initial stop was down below the low of a previous couple of days. Had a little bit of a pullback, and there you go. That trailing stop, I haven't marked on here the one from last night. So let me just put that on here right now. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I've got most of these I have updated, but not all of them. So T-stop on Netflix right now is at 440 even, right there. And you can see that took a little bit of a dip. It was kind of a normal sort of couple of day pullback right after it triggered in, and then off to the races, right? It's one of the stay-at-home stocks. And I believe, let me look at a weekly chart. I believe that's probably, oh, let me zoom out there. I was going to say, yeah, that's an all-time high for Netflix. All-time high. Look at these marks I have way back here from prior shows back in 2016. Look at that breakout 2017. Look at some. I mean, some of these are pretty amazing, to be honest with you. Look at that. So, I mean, Netflix has always had like really nice sort of technical patterns, right? These breakout levels, breakout levels. Look at that. That's a beauty right there on the weekly chart. So, but anyway, so here we are. Netflix all-time high through the target, trailing stop, up here under all this. So looking pretty good. Moving on, Newmont Mining. Newmont Mining, obviously another. Well, it says Newmont Corporation. I've always known it as Newmont Mining. So sometimes these companies they change the name around a little bit. Nice cup forming here. Um, Basically just sort of hanging around the trigger price here. Stop still down here to allow for the trailing stop is basically just sort of designed so that it will kind of hang back and allow for a normal cycle down. Sometimes the market actually has pullbacks that go for a few days or a week or something like that, a cycle down. And to start off with, until the price like really gets going, gets some mojo past the target, the trailing stop's going to kind of hang back and attempt to stay wide enough so that we don't get knocked out on sort of a normal price cycle. And of course, again, that's all based on ATR, so this is looking okay. QDEL. This has been one of the sort of big winners of this particular cycle, right? And so you can see that, let's see, as of last night, this thing was up 26%. It's down 1% today, so, but there you go. Nice pattern too. This is, I mean, it's expensive stock, but ran up, had this big sell down here, trend line break. There's the trigger price, 164. There's where it triggered in, like right at the trigger price, and then it just took off, and it made the bulk of the move in just a couple of days there, and then it's just been sort of hanging around up here, and it's pretty wide ranges, right? So you're talking, these lows here, 205 to 217, and so it's hanging around up there, and the stop is all the way up here past the target, and so kind of interesting. It'll be interesting to see if this stop, now that all these days have gone by, it'll be interesting to see if this stop just kind of hangs right here or if it actually trails up a little bit more. My guess is that the stop could come up just a little bit, but until this thing breaks out of this sort of consolidation, like if it breaks out to the upside of this consolidation, then this stop will likely come up somewhere just under today's low. If it just kind of hangs around here for a couple of more days, then this stop probably will stay where it is. But regardless, the big move happened all at once, blew through the target, right, on this particular day. And so looking pretty good. This one I'm a little disappointed in, this mRNA, right? You remember we looked at this back over here when it was on the pending list, and let me extend that out a little bit. So like back over here, I was talking about how, boy, this thing looked like it could just, turn the corner and just rip higher. It looked good because of this pullback and this real tight consolidation and, kind of similar to over here. But look at this. So, it triggered in over here and then it did pop a little bit. right? But it's just totally stuck sideways. I guess waiting for news, right? So this was the day that this particular stock kicked off like the whole rally in the entire market, which is pretty amazing. So there you go. And you can see that, the stops come up. So at this juncture right here, it's looking pretty good, right? So if the trigger was 61, the open this day was 62.35. Yeah, so there's a couple of bucks, $2.50 of risk here, and so far it's hung in there pretty well. So that's a kind of a nice consolidation. One piece of news and this thing could just blast off. And so I still really like the look of this. I'm just more surprised than anything that it's just been trading in this tight range right here without any significant directional movement. But it looks prime. I mean, it looks primed. This is quite honestly, this thing breaks over like say, 67 on the way up. This would be a good one to keep a close eye on, just for what probably happens is something crazy, like there's going to be some news that comes out, and you might get one of these days, like this particular day here, where you had everything looked pretty good, and you thought, oh, it's breaking out, and then you have like a huge crazy gap up. So because it looks like it's waiting on news to me. So anyway, it is what it is, and looking pretty good. The stops moved up, and so not a whole lot of risk there. Although, as volatile as this is, all it would take is like one nasty day to knock this thing out. But so we'll keep a close eye on that. That'd be a good one to watch intraday, just on the outside chance that I'd set an alert for, basically like 67 bucks. If this thing can start breaking 67 on volume, you could get a move up into this area fairly quickly. So next on the list is FOLD. Yeah, this one's been a monster too. Here's another one that triggered in what I would call premature triggering in. The idea is that a stock pulls back, consolidates, gets real tight, and then turns back up. And when it's on the pending list, the trigger price will come down over time to meet it at a lower price and then trigger in. And here you go. This one just like triggered on some news, right? And we talked about this last Wednesday. Talked about how, there must have been some news. This thing just triggered in kind of prematurely. And I think I remember mentioning how sometimes, you get a move like that kicks off like a rally, and there you go. So I hadn't marked the target on this one as of last week, but the target was 15 bucks, and so there you go. It's hanging right above the target here as we speak. And the targets are there for a reason. They're calculated based on the ATR of the stock and 15 even. And so, the target's a good place to take partial profits. Theoretically, these days, with zero commissions, and it just kind of depends on how you feel about it. There's a little bit of discretion you can use. You can sell it all at the target, call it a win, and move on, right? But the system itself only closes a trade when it hits the trailing stop. So my guess is this trailing stop's probably going to ratchet up again today after the close. And so you could see the progression there. And next trailing stop's probably going to be, really tight. Another thing I should mention here, and I didn't even mention it on a couple of the previous ones like Netflix and QDEL, but there's actually a parabolic stop that is basically, kicked in today. And so you'll see that in the table. Yeah, we didn't talked about the parabolic stops too much. If you go to the open trades table and you look at, there it is, FOLD, you'll see there's a P stop at 1530. Basically what that means is the stock's gone sort of parabolic, unsustainable run up, and that's where if you sold half of it or you're hanging on past the target, whatever, the P stop basically is like, you know, good protection level. Parabolic stop ratchets up so that you can essentially like capture most of the profits. This is a likely place for it to pull back. So we'll have to see. But anyway, it's all explained obviously in the documentation there. And so you know, there's a couple different ways to play it, as you also see explained. You can take half off. What I was about to say earlier is that with zero commissions, yeah, it's changed everything, right? And so it's entirely feasible now to, even if, you know, no matter how many shares that you're trading or whatever, to sell half at the target, let the other half run. 'Cause as you've seen, some of these just blow right through the target. And it's not a big deal to, you know, to sell partial positions. This and that. The commissions are not figuring into it. So back in the day, you know, the commissions would eat you alive. You know, you'd pay $7 or $10 to buy it, and then maybe, you know, maybe you had 100 shares or something, and then you thought, okay, you know, it's up a few bucks. And so, you know, if I want to sell half of it, that's another $10, and on to half, and then I get stopped out, that's another 10. And so, yeah, so you know, everything about this short-term trading has changed for the better. And quite honestly, with zero commissions, it also allows you to trade some of these more expensive stocks without even, you know, without even batting an eye, to be honest with you, because it doesn't matter if you're buying, you know, 5 or 10 shares. It's all about percentage moves. And so let's move on here. It's all about percentage moves. And so back in the old days, you'd have to worry about, you know, the commissions and how many shares you had and all this and that. And but now all you got to worry about is, you know, how many dollars you putting in a trade and what's your percentage return. So this WRN, excuse me, hasn't really done anything. Triggered in over here, like right at the trigger price, and trailing stop is just hanging right here at the initial trailing stop. This thing's only been open for a few days, right? It basically triggered in this day right here when it crossed the trigger line. And so there you go. 617, and there's 618. So there's your, and so yeah, I mean, it's only been open for a few days, as well as like the rest of them we're going to look at. So the ones that we just looked at have been open for a little while, with the market kind of, you know, acting as strong as it has been, which may be coming to an end today. You know, we had a lot of new stocks sort of trigger in. So anyway, yeah, this one's actually not looking so bad still. Transportation trucking, that's interesting. Okay, XLRN. Look at this. This just goes to show you that so this one triggered in right here. It's only been open for a few days too. Right there. There was the trigger price, there was the close over the trigger, and then boom. Trailing stops only moved one time. This trailing stop will likely come up significantly today. This one's actually hit the target. The target on XLRN is 105, and geez, it's like hanging above the target right here. So there you go. I mean, what you really want to see, and we're in this kind of market, right? I mean, there's a lot of speculation going on. This is an interesting period of time that we're in right here. A lot of retail speculation, a lot of silliness and craziness going on, right? And I mean, we got a global pandemic. We're in the middle of a recession. 20 million people or more are collecting unemployment. Um, Fed's printing money like it's going out of style, and Powell basically said they're going to print more, right? I think it was last Wednesday when I did the show that it was the Fed meeting or whatever, and so the Fed's going to do whatever it takes to try and keep asset prices elevated, and so you got all these different sort of competing things. Anyhow, this particular stock, nice little sell off, sort of bottomed out in a range, turned back up, caught it on the turn, and there you go. Tagged a new high. And of course, today is like one of the first sort of weekdays we've seen in a while, and so now you got to basically day's not over, but yesterday looks like a pivot high, and so there you go. Still pretty good move in just a couple of days there. Can't argue with that. MDB. This one's only been open for, today's the 5th day or whatever. It's making a move in the right direction. It's not looking so bad. There's triggered in like, right around the trigger line. Initial stop one at the bottom of the pattern. It's headed in the right direction. I hate to jinx it, but yeah, I mean that's too steep of a trend line really to draw right there, but look at it. I mean, market's selling off today. This thing's holding up, so yeah, big cap tech stock, nice up, humongous uptrend, pullback. Theoretically, hopefully, we get enough of a trend resumption. Target on this is up here at 230. Yeah, some of these haven't really been open very long at all, and so you can see on that the stop has only moved one time, right? So there's a target, 230. Looks doable, right? Looks doable. Theoretically, a little bit more forward progress, that stop will be up to break even. So moving on, SWCH. Not much happening here. Triggered in. Trigger price was 18. It's been kind of floating sideways. A few red days there. Not a huge big deal, honestly. Not too exciting. Not much going on here. And as we can see now, like the high from the previous couple days here, we need like what we want to see is big up day. It's kind of not extremely exciting, although I mean, hey, good looking stock, tech stock or whatever, but it's just kind of floundering around here. 18 and a half bucks, not really doing anything. So here's an interesting one, this LRN. So check it out. Like this just re-triggered in over here, right? Just a couple of days ago. Had this big pull back, and then sell off, and then re-triggered in. And so you guys remember this one from the prior trade. So it had triggered in at 23.50 over here, ran up to 28, and then finally came down and hit the trailing stop right around where a little bit above the previous target. And then there was a sell off, for 5 or 6 days, and then it started to turn back up and re-triggered back in. You don't see that too often, but it is what it is. Yesterday was kind of you see a gap up, push higher and sort of reversal day, and now it's coming down today. And so basically, in theory, it'll put on a day similar to this, and then maybe tomorrow it gaps down and rallies back up. Right? It has a tendency to do that. This is sort of the behavior of this stock, where you get these down days, and then maybe you get a little bit of a down. Theoretically, you get a gap down and then a push higher, and there's a lot of up down days. So I wouldn't get too concerned about what you see here. Although, and so that stop, down here, kind of below all this. And so for whatever reason, if we do get into an actual market sell-off, and this thing breaks down, then that protective stop is sitting right there. All right, moving on. So many of these. You guys remember I think it was last week when I drew all this funny stuff on here. I drew this like uptrend and then how it pulled back and sort of based out here and then turned back up. And so when I was updating the stop, I left all that on the chart just to sort of, it's kind of uncanny how this actually manifested in a very similar way to where I had it sort of marked up there. So another precious metal stock, silver stock. And look at how that initial stop went right there where I talked about this thing was sort of based out. That was the big support level, right? And so there you go. Not looking too bad. The stop is just now starting to trail a little bit. And so after tonight's update, it'll probably trail up a little bit higher. But so far, so good on this. And then, of course, the very next one, same sort of thing. It's only been open for, this is on 622. This closed above. And this one's kind of weird because, it looks pretty good. The pattern looks good. But the way that it triggered in is kind of funky. You had this gap up over the trigger and this close. And so it's kind of chasing it a little bit to just buy it at the open this day, right? And so you can use some discretion too on that. If a stock, gaps up over the trigger, or, when it finally triggers in, if it's a little extended, you can kind of hang back or whatever. And I've actually talked to some people that will set a limit order at the exact trigger price. And so, that's what Jeffrey recommends you do is pull the trigger on half the position without even worrying about it. So, up here at the open the day it triggers, and then set a limit order for the other half at the trigger price. That's a pretty good way of doing it in like a mechanical way of doing it. And so what'll happen is, some of the time you'll get a half position, on the gap up over the trigger, and it'll just take off and never look back. And then the other half of the time, it'll fade back down and you can get filled at the exact trigger price. The cool thing about that is, psychologically speaking, like in your mind, the great thing about that is if you did that on this particular stock, you got a small position, got a half a position, and you got a buy order in. And so you're not really, you're kind of hoping it goes down to fill you on the other half, right? You're not stressing out because you loaded the boat, way over the trigger price on this gap up, $5 over the trigger price or whatever. And then now it's pulling back. And so that makes a lot of sense. It really does. But, the other thing I was talking about is gaps over the trigger. So if you set a limit order at the trigger price for the whole position, there's a lot of times, I won't say a lot of times, but, say half the time, you'll never get filled and the stock will just take off without you. So I think that's a pretty good mechanical strategy. And again, with zero commissions, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter now to your profit if you enter in two different positions, right? So, you buy a half position here, pay zero commission, set a limit order for the other half, pay zero commission. And so if you get filled down there, then hey, All right, moving on. There's only a couple more. MASI just triggered in yesterday. Fading a little bit today on the market weakness. No huge big deal. Although, if the market rolls over, then, this one's probably gonna roll over too. Medical appliances. Huh, interesting. Not too exciting. And then last but not least, RGEN, same sort of thing. This one's got a pretty nice pattern. It's very expensive stock, but it's got like sort of this little cupping pattern going on. You can see that stop is, the stop on this is 112.80. So that's just, it's a little bit above these lows, but right in this neighborhood. Good spot for an initial stop. And so you can see yesterday, it's kind of turning the corner. The funny thing about this, so this one theoretically is just triggering in today, and it's only triggering in, on that little bitty poke above. Oh, can't even draw it on there because I'm zoomed in too far, but that little poke above the actual trigger line, like the high today is 119.82. Trigger price that it closed above yesterday, 119.30, and so there you go. Bigger scheme of things, don't sweat the nickels and dimes on a $120 stock. And so this thing is either going to, turn the corner. And this is a biotech stock, right? Biotech's been pretty hot, although that's a pretty big sell-off that this thing had. And so it's either going to cut back up or it's going to fail and then take another leg down. So we'll just have to see here. And so basically today is the day it's triggering in. And there's a couple there's a couple other things that you can do. Speaking of discretionarily trading, there's a couple other things you can do. One of which is, like, say you were not in this stock. Say that, that you weren't too excited about it or whatever. Maybe you're already, kind of all in, or for whatever reason. I mean, if you didn't get in this one, my suggestion would be, and this could work or not work, but my suggestion would be is to wait until it crosses back up over the trigger, right? And so basically over the next couple of days, I mean, here's the thing, today, like this stock, by the end of the day, this thing could go green and be up here at 123. We just don't know. So, but my suggestion would be at this point here, rather than saying, oh yeah, it's a couple of bucks below the trigger, I'll buy it now. I'd wait for it to actually go back up through the trigger price, right? Because that will indicate that, that'll indicate strength, that it's turning back up. So there you go. Still a pretty decent setup. So, all right, real quick, peek at the S&P. S&P is trading right at the bottom of this little range here, right? And it's down 53 points. It's down, 1.7%. So we're seeing some volatility here lately. Today there was a gap down, and it's continued to sell down. We're hitting the lows. So, I don't mind seeing a little bit of excitement, but we'll have to see exactly. And so, if you look at where we are now, and you look at like the lows of these 3 days back here, still a long way down. So keep your eye on these trend lines, and keep your eye on, see if it breaks down below. It's starting to poke down below the bottom of this box here. So you'd be talking about a 6-day low. Not that that means anything, but yeah, after the run up we've had, it would not be it would not be a bad thing to really see some air come out of this market. I think what the market needs is a real sort of a shakeout. It needs a shakeout because it seems like the sentiment has gotten a little bit frothy. So, all right, well, I've been talking for almost an hour, so I'm going to wrap this up real quick here. And thanks for tuning in. I will see you guys back here a week from today, same time, same channel.